Welcome to the NGRN Discussion Club. Today I, Volodymyr Solovian, will host the podcast, and my colleagues Mykhailo, Samus and Igor Fedyk are with me today as usual. Without a doubt, the last days will become a landmark in the history of the war. The successful counteroffensive of Ukrainian troops in the Kharkiv region put the Russian army on the verge of collapse. It became obvious that at the end of the summer, Russia had finally lost its offensive potential. The Kharkiv defeat resulted in a severe reputational blow to the Russian government within Russia. Another rapid success of Ukrainian forces at the operational level could lead to the total collapse of the Russian army. This threat is perceived as existential for the Kremlin. Putin understands that the deep state people who are loyal to him today will not forgive him the defeat in Ukraine. Therefore, the Kremlin's response is escalation, which consists in the annexation of the occupied territories and potential mobilization in Russia. I propose to start our discussion within the topic of mobilization in Russia. In fact, this step means recognizing of the failure of the so-called special military operation. The war is entering in terminal phase, because Putin has burned the last opportunities to reach a diplomatic solution and exit from the war in which he cannot win. So what do we know as for now? After the addresses of the Russian president and minister of defense to the Russians, we know that at least 300,000 Russians would be called up as part of mobilization that will apply to those with previous military experience. Those who served and those who has military specialty are the main targets for mobilization. But also we should know that Russia will provide autumn conscription, and under this framework, at least 100 troops, young men, will be also part of Russian army, and that poses a big challenge for Russians how to equip such a big amount of servicemen and also organize logistics. What is interesting that clause 7 in the decree of mobilization in the Russian Federation is hidden. According to Putin's press secretary Peskov, the unpublished 7th paragraph of the decree is related to the number of mobilized. That means that we don't know exact on what number Russians rely, and that poses the feeling of unbelief among Russians on to what extent this mobilization will be engaged, and what is the real number of Russians that would be called up in next months. But also to my perspective, there are no infrastructure for such mobilization in the Russian Federation. At first, there are no junior and senior commanders to guide mobilized units. Also, there are no proper and modern military uniforms and equipment for these new formed units. Also, there is a challenge of lack of the proper amount of modern equipment, especially after a half year of heavy losses in Ukraine. And also, there are no prepared training grounds for mobilized units to scale out. That means that Russian government will use compulsion and fear to provide this mobilization, and obviously that poses a real threat to political stability inside Russia. The next aim was to threaten the West, and as usually Putin used nuclear blackmail. He threatened the West, saying that he is not bluffing, saying that Russia will respond with a nuclear weapon. So, guys, what do you think? How the West will respond? Whether these blackmail attempts will result in lifting weaponry supplies to Ukraine?
I just want to add maybe a little bit of internal Russian impact of this decision. How I understand this. When we talked before, what is the main plan for Putin, for example, how to try to win this war? Maybe you remember that a couple of weeks ago we talked that the main plan for Putin is trying to defroze the front line, and of course defroze literally to froze Europe and Ukraine during the winter, trying to press on European politicians, trying to change their mind on to support Ukraine, etc., and to be ready on the spring to propose something like new Minsk agreement, and it was the general plan for Putin. But everything was changed by Ukrainian armed forces after the offensive operation. And as I understood, Putin decided to be a leader of ultra radical right, I would say, nationalist, imperialistic part of Russian elites. If you remember, Mr. Dugin, Mr. Malofeev, the guys like Girkin, a lot of people of this ultra right and nationalistic part of Russian elites, they insist that Putin needs to play seriously with mobilization, with war against not only Ukraine but NATO. And I think that analytics in Kremlin, and of course beyond around Kremlin, they talked about the threat and challenge for Putin to avoid these guys. I mean, the part of the ultra radical nationalists, to avoid them, because ultra radical nationalists started to be absolutely angry and crazy about Ukrainian offensive operation in Kharkiv region, and they proposed to maybe to push out Putin and create some kind of military junta in Russia. So I think I understand this move of step by Putin as an attempt to be a leader of this junta of a military empire, and to be a leader of this Malofeev, Girkin, Dugin kind of guys, and trying to continue as a dictator, real dictator. The problem is for Russians that for 20 years they live in some, of course, a social agreement, which was kind of Putin gave them they gave the Russians enough money to be in comfort in front of the television, in front of the full fridge of normal food, and do not participate in any bad things like war and such things. Putin promised them this social agreement. In opposite, Putin promised them that Russians won't participate in any war and kind of military operations which will touch everybody in Russia. Now this agreement broken. Now they need to understand that they will live in another country. They will live in dictatorship with military junta in Kremlin. It's literally now military junta in Kremlin. And it means that now we will check Russian people. They exist or they don't exist. So when it was discussions before, do we have some good Russians? And a lot of in Europe countries, in United States, they told that we shouldn't punish all of Russians because it's Putin started the war against Ukraine. Now we will check how many Russians will support a real participation in mobilization, how many Russians will go to the streets and started to make a protest, and how many Russians will leave country. So now is the key moment for a country with the name Russian Federation. And I think that this country will not exist in next short term of time. I could say that previously it was a kind of Russian Federation. Now it's a military junta in Kremlin, and I'm sure that all of this big territory, a large territory, won't exist in this shape in I would say several months or years. It depends on the process in Russia itself, but I'm sure this is a critical time for Russians as a nation. They exist like a nation, or they just exist like part of idiots and these junta with really idiot ideas. It's really idiot ideas. And looking at the physical law of physics, they should be destroyed by internal protests. We will see, of course.
Putin again is sharing the responsibility. Of course, we know that this decision was made about this partial mobilization was made by him or by, let's say, one of these Kremlin powers, which you meant, Mykhailo, this nationalist, chauvinist, nationalistic, these guys who are in favor of war, not only with Ukraine, but with the rest of the world. So he is sharing responsibility with the Russian population. So you mentioned about that. So how Russian population will support this so-called special military operation. So if you join the army, if you are mobilized, those who do not go do not join the army, they still support this special military operation. So he's shared his decision with people. Another one. The financial support and supply by all these financial means with this mobilization will be shared with the Russian government. So if this mobilization or supporting the supplying the mobilization with all the national needed resources will fail, so the government will be responsible for that, not Putin, but the government. And another interesting thing is call for directors of the defense industry to assure the producing of new equipment and supplying with this equipment of the new units and so on and so forth. So if this process will fail, so the responsibility will be not on Putin. It will not be Putin's responsibility because it was his decision, but the responsibility of these directors of these enterprises. Another thing, we see that Putin doesn't have the support, even with his, even with the partners who were supposed, with the countries that were supposed as partners of Russia and Putin, like India or China. We've seen that the criticism from Indian Prime Minister during this Shanghai organization meeting. Today we've seen the news that Turkey says that, or Erdogan said that Crimea should be returned to Ukraine. Also, we've seen the statement from China, from Peking, that the situation between Russia and Ukraine should be resolved in a peaceful manner or whatever. So do not escalate. But despite that, Putin and his allies in Russian political elite, they decided to escalate without any support. And we've seen the reaction in the Russian society nowadays that they do not support this such measures by Putin. As for technical aspects of this mobilization, it was mentioned by Volodya, and it's very important about the problems with the young commanders, with the sergeants and junior officers. So they just don't have it. They don't have people who will train these mobilized people who join the army during this mobilization. So it means that all these claimed 300,000 people, they will be just the cannon fodder. Just the cannon fodder that will fill the gaps on the front line. But the problem is that this process can be finished in 1, 2, or 3 days. It will take enough time for Russians to gather these people, to somehow equip them. It's another question how they will be equipped. Another question is financial aspect of this mobilization, because Putin said that they will have the mobilized people will have almost the same salary as the military who serve with the according to the contract in the Russian army, and they, as we know, they receive about something like $3,000 per month. So it will be a great pressure for the Russian military budget during this mobilization, and it's only about the salary. Another question is the equipment, providing them with food, medicine, whatever. before the war, there was only one conclusion. If Russia starts a full-scale war against Ukraine, full-scale war, not limited, somewhere in Donbass, some really special operation in Donetsk, in Luhansk region, but a full-scale military operation in Ukraine, it will be the end for Russia. Not only for Putin's regime, it will be the end for Russian Federation. And now we see, to my mind, so this Putin's decision is nothing like it's the agony of his regime. He is trying to preserve his regime. So he and his close allies, they consider that this such a measures like this partial mobilization is the only possible way for them nowadays in current situation to preserve regime. So they cannot retreat. They cannot accept another option except for this partial mobilization. Because in other way, they think that if they show that they are weak, so that the regime will be swapped. So this is how I see this situation nowadays.
Yeah, still there are many speculations on how the situation will develop, but I'd like to bring to you a question on whether we may predict, or just try to predict, how Russian command plan to use these new recruitments, whether the main goal is to replace those troops that are still in Ukraine, but maybe there is a goal to create a new direction or reestablish the attempts to siege Kyiv, for example, with those new recruitment.
No, absolutely no. He cannot change the troops that he has in Ukraine and send instead of them the new troops, because these guys, these Russian guys that are in Ukraine now, and military and mercenaries and Wagner and other Rosguardia, and so they at least they have the combat experience. No, you cannot take them out of the front, the guys that have combat experience, and substitute them with the guys that have not only no experience but no training. So
yeah, I think that your question always makes sense. I mean that I'm sure that they will try to make a front wider, to send troops again to Belarus. I'm sure that look at the Belarus armed forces. They still continue the exercises, training, and it means that they are waiting for something, and they waiting for Russians, which how they could act actually. Of course, they could create some new units, but in the same time, I'm sure that they will use so-called regrouping and refreshing of the units which were beaten by Ukrainians on the front line, and they try to. Of course they need some poles, the operational poles to this regrouping. It depends, of course, of Ukrainian activities, but I think that they may plan to create new units and use all the units to send it to Belarus and create a new fronts to make a problem for Ukrainian forces, because Ukrainian forces now concentrated actually, especially after the change in the front after the Kharkov Izum operation, they change the front and make it more stable, especially talking about the Oskol River. So now it's really the absolutely favorable situation for Ukrainian forces, especially if we're talking about the Kherson Platzdarm. Ukraine stabilized here, and for Russians it's impossible to make it like more active. So for Russians now it's a critical moment to create new front for Ukraine. What I think about it, I think that Ukrainian forces will react very aggressively on these attempts, and it won't be any 24th of February again. It will be disaster for Lukashenko. If we imagine that Belarus forces together with Russians try to cross the border again, maybe in Volyn, I'm not sure that Kyiv, because Kyiv it's absolutely not very favorable geographically. If you again using airborne with helicopters, it's a crazy idea. But I think they will trying to use maybe some units from western part of Ukraine, trying to withdraw Ukrainian forces from eastern part of Ukraine and trying to put them there. But I could predict that it will be using of Belarus units of Ukrainian armed forces, and they will, and Ukrainian together with Belarus forces, Belarus units together with Ukrainian forces will attack very aggressively, and will use the same tactics like in Kharkiv Oblast, using small groups, very fast operations, and go just to Lithuanian border and Minsk and whatever. So I cannot imagine that Belarus forces together with Russians will conduct some effective defensive operations. But Ukrainian forces will create a huge problem for Russians and Belarus, and it could be that the disaster of Russia will start from territory of Belarus, when Lukashenko will be just killed by protesters. And it's very easy to imagine, because Belarus, they conserve, they save the protest potential, and it needs only push them up here. And I think that it will be very strong and very aggressive protests compared even to 2020 years in August. So I think that it will be a very bad decision if Russians will try to organize a next offensive operation from Belarus territory. But I could say that they will try. I think that they will try to make again the front line for more than 2,000 kilometers, thinking that 300,000 additionally, even without any preparations, well, they will create just a military pressure on Ukrainian forces on the front of 2,000 kilometers. It will be disaster for Ukrainians, they think. But I am sure that it will be disaster not for Ukraine, but for Belarus and for Lukashenko and for Russia, actually. Even if Belarus will be a Platzdarm for Russian offensive operation, we need to destroy this Platzdarm. This is reality of the war. We shouldn't wait when they go to Ukrainian territory, but if they cross the line, it will be should be immediately artillery, HIMARS, and everything making impact on Belarus, to show that this is not a joke. This is serious situation for Belarus.
Well, we've seen during the last portion of military aid from the United States that some shifts in supplying us with artillery, munition from 155 to 105 caliber. So these are the munition for this a little bit smaller cannons, but the West, our Western partners, have enough amounts of them, of these weapons. So it's easier for them to supply us with this artillery, which is less precision, but the quality of these systems and the ammunition for them is higher. So, and
yeah, it's very effective for direct support, from direct support of the troops.
Yes, for direct support of the troops.
And actually, another version that 155 caliber will be used for smart. Ammunition.
Smart ammunition, yes, for destroying these common posts.
This caliber, this kind of ammunition to use very effectively, because the problem with 155, it's very expensive. It's very it's very easy to exhaust it if you're using like a normal artillery in these very high intensive artillery battles. But if you use smart weapon with smart ammunition, it's absolutely different situation. It's like 1 to 10 in effectiveness. By the way.
So another issue to discuss is Kremlin's plan to annex occupied territories of Ukraine, and it is very likely that soon Kremlin will proclaim the occupied 4 regions as Russian territory. And as we know, since yesterday it was proclaimed that until 27th of September, these so-called referendums held by occupational administrations will be held in 4 regions of Ukraine, in Donetsk, in Lugansk, Zaporizhia and Kherson regions. And that means that Putin understands that he cannot defend the captured territories with military measures. In these circumstances, he adopts nuclear blackmail and also tries to change the versus of the ongoing war. By proclaiming these territories as Russia, he tried to find a moral justification and to convert the so-called special military operation into a war, which aim is to defend Russian territories. That will bring a crucial change to the war itself. At the same time, Ukrainian authorities proclaim that that means nothing, and Ukraine will conduct all the attempts and will continue offensive operations to liberate our territories. That means that Russia is going to conduct unprecedented step to annex territories which it still does not control. For example, the big city of Zaporizhia of at least 700,000 populations, which will be proclaimed as a Russian city, and that means that the war will be continuing on Russian territories from perspective of the Kremlin and Russian legislative. That brings Putin and measures to implement even a tactical nuclear weapon to destroy Ukrainian command or stop Ukrainian offensive operations. That obviously will lead us to uncontrolled developments of the war. What is your assumptions on whether Putin will indeed recognize these territories as Russians after the so-called referendums, or in other extent, maybe you consider this as an attempt to make a pressure on a diplomatic track, but in case if he will indeed recognize 4 Ukrainian regions as Russian territories, what will be the response of the West and how Ukraine will react on that?
Yeah, very easy. Of course, Putin will recognize, he will blackmail, but it's bullshit, total bullshit for Western Ukraine. The problem is here that he will use nuclear blackmail, and now is very important Western reaction on it, because Ukrainian reaction we know we will continue to fight, but very important here the reaction of United States and UK at least. And maybe you remember the candidate to prime minister, current prime minister, Liz Truss, already answered on this question, how she will act if needed use nuclear weapon. As I'm not mistaken, she told that I will use it. We need to check this. We need to check these words, but it means that actually UK, at least UK, could be our guarantor against Russian nuclear blackmail. Very important United States position. But I could remind you the Budapest Memorandum, exactly of this situation. Even Lavrov and Putin always talking about the Budapest Memorandum. They told him that this is only about nuclear attack against Ukraine. Okay, now we have exactly what we are talking about. Even Putin saying the same, that this is a direct nuclear threat for Ukraine. So United States and UK, as our guarantor from Budapest Memorandum, should think about it, should give us a guarantee that they are protecting us with nuclear umbrella. And I think it will be decision in this situation. If not, I think Putin will try to use this blackmail, but I'm not sure that he is going to use a nuclear weapon. But again, because now he is a leader of a militarist junta, ultra-right marginal military junta, everything is possible. They even they can eat even spiders during the night with special procedures. Like Dugin always saying that we all need to die because of Great Russia, and our death will give us energy to win in this war against the global West. So we will see. If Putin really believes what Dugin is saying, we actually in big problem now, in big problem. Not only we, everything on this planet is in big problem.
I absolutely agree with Mykhailo. 1000% that he will recognize the so-called referendums because this was his idea. So nothing happens without Putin's decision. Two reasons for that. First is for his internal audience, to show that he is still macho, that he is still a collector of lands, that everything goes according to the plan, and so on and so forth. And second one, as Mykhailo mentioned, it's the blackmail, to blackmail, nuclear blackmail of the West, and checking their reaction. So, but I think that at this moment, we're not talking about in general the moment. At the moment before the war, in January and February this year, but at this moment, after the successes of Ukrainian army, after the losses of Russia in Ukraine, after all these things that happened during these 7 months, I think that the West will not believe the Putin's blackmail.
Thanks for following us. I think it is our agenda for today is over. Follow us in our next podcast, and we will try to bring you a new analysis of ongoing war and current developments.
Subscribe here to receive more videos from the new Geopolitics Research Network.